The empath's final break isn't loud, it's silent, and it's soul-altering. What if the most powerful no you ever say makes no sound at all? Empaths don't erupt. They vanish, not in anger, not in revenge, but in an eerie and sacred silence that confuses everyone who once fed off their energy. It's not a fight. It's not a breakdown. It's an energetic exodus. While the narcissist still believes they're in control, the empath has already exited the arena, not physically, but psychically. Their body might remain in the room, but their spirit has folded its wings and flown. What appears to be quiet detachment is actually a soul returning home to itself. This is not mere avoidance. It's a final initiation. The empath doesn't scream. They don't slam doors. They simply stop leaking their essence into someone who never saw it. What the narcissist perceives as sudden absence is the culmination of years of subtle erosion, of being unseen, unheard, and emotionally devoured under the mask of connection. At first, the empath cannot even explain it. There are no words for this rupture. It feels like a collapse, yet strangely like coming alive. Something ancient rises, an inner knowing that whispers, "This is not love, this is a trance." And in that instant, the empath's silence becomes louder than any confrontation ever could be. They don't leave to teach a lesson. They leave because their soul demands it. This is where the real story begins, not in the trauma of the relationship, but in the stillness after it. The empath doesn't just walk away from the narcissist. They walk back toward their own wholeness. Now, let's uncover why the empath had to disappear, and what sacred transformation begins when they finally do. Have you ever wondered why the kindest hearts so often end up chained to the cruelest ones? The empath does not stumble into the arms of a narcissist by accident. There is an invisible thread pulling them together, woven from childhood wounds and unconscious agreements. The empath, conditioned from an early age to earn love through sacrifice, enters adulthood believing that to heal others is to be worthy. They carry an inner script that whispers, "If I absorb their pain, if I fix their chaos, then maybe I'll finally deserve to stay." And so they mistake domination for intimacy, manipulation for passion, and cruelty for proof that love must always cost something. Think of the woman who spent years smoothing over her father's rage, learning to be quiet so he would calm down. Or the boy who became his mother's emotional caretaker, listening to her grief long before he understood his own. These children grow into adults who carry an invisible contract. Your pain matters more than mine. And when they meet the narcissist, who thrives on being worshipped, this contract clicks into place with eerie precision. Carl Jung called this projection the unconscious assignment of our unmet needs and hidden wounds onto others. The empath projects their desire to be seen onto the narcissist, who mirrors back just enough charm to keep the illusion alive. But here is the paradox. The narcissist does not see the empath at all. They only see a mirror reflecting their own hunger. And the empath, blinded by their compulsion to heal, abandons themselves piece by piece until they can no longer recognize their own reflection. The tragedy is not that the empath loves too deeply, but that they confuse self-abandonment with love. They believe enduring suffering is noble when in truth it is the psyche's way of replaying an old wound, begging for resolution. This is not just a toxic bond, it is symbolic, a soul contract forged in the unconscious, demanding to be broken. So the question becomes, when will the empath finally see that what they are calling love is really a ritual of self-erasure? When will they recognize that the cruelty they endure is not proof of depth, but a mirror of their own forgotten worth? And more importantly, have you ever noticed how many people you know, are still living out this silent contract, mistaking pain for intimacy. How many times can a soul bend before it finally breaks? For the empath, the answer often comes in moments that seem unrelated to the relationship itself. Waking up one morning with an ache that no doctor can name, finding themselves unable to get out of bed, or being startled awake by recurring dreams of running down endless corridors with no exit. These are not coincidences. They are signals that the psyche has reached its threshold. What the mind rationalizes away, the body and the unconscious cannot keep buried forever. In real life, this looks like the woman who ignored years of gaslighting until her hands began to tremble with chronic anxiety. It looks like the man who always said yes to keep the peace until his chest tightened into panic every time the phone rang. It looks like the parent who carried everyone else's burdens until migraines left them paralyzed in dark rooms. Jung taught that the unconscious erupts when it has been ignored for too long. The eruption is not punishment, but a sacred implosion, a collapse designed to reclaim what has been abandoned. For the empath, this implosion is not loud. It rarely looks like slamming doors or shouting matches. Instead, it is the quietest revolution. They stop answering texts. They stop rushing to fix what was never theirs to carry. They begin pulling their energy back from every corner of the world where they had scattered themselves in the hope of being loved. To the narcissist, it feels sudden and inexplicable. But in truth, the breaking point has been forming for years, carved by every act of self-abandonment. Carl Jung once wrote that there is no coming to consciousness without pain. The pain of the empath is not only in realizing that the narcissist never truly saw them, but in confronting how long they themselves refused to see their own worth. This is why the implosion feels sacred. It is the death of illusion, not the death of love. It is the psyche reclaiming the truth it buried for survival. So here is the real question. Have you ever noticed how your body begins to speak louder when your soul is no longer willing to be silent? Do you dismiss the exhaustion, the panic, the dreams that disturb your sleep? Or do you dare to see them as the soul's rebellion? In that rebellion lies the turning point. Because the moment the empath finally whispers, "No more," the entire architecture of the false relationship begins to crumble. What follows is not ruin, but rebirth. What happens when all the emotions you've buried finally demand to be felt? For many empaths, the answer comes suddenly, like an earthquake cracking the surface of a carefully constructed life. Years of swallowing anger to keep the peace, years of smiling when their heart ached, years of pretending "I'm fine" when they were breaking. These emotions do not disappear. They wait. And when the soul has had enough, it rises with the force of a volcano that can no longer stay dormant. In real life, this revolt can look like the mother who has always been the strong one, suddenly bursting into tears in the middle of the grocery store because one more demand was placed on her shoulders. It looks like the quiet professional who has spent decades saying yes to every project is suddenly quitting without notice, unable to tolerate one more ounce of exploitation. It looks like the man who never raised his voice is slamming his fist against the steering wheel in traffic, realizing for the first time how much he has muted his own rage. To outsiders, these eruptions may seem irrational or extreme, but from the inside, they are surviving. Carl Jung saw this as the shadow's revolt, the return of all the disowned parts of the psyche. Rage, grief, and sovereignty are not enemies of love. They are protectors of truth. When they surface, they do not come to destroy the empath. They come to burn away what is false. What once felt terrifying, the fear of being too much, of being rejected for speaking up, now becomes the very fire that purifies. The empath learns that authenticity is not dangerous, but essential. And here lies the paradox. The moment you stop rescuing others, you begin rescuing yourself. The moment you stop fearing your own anger, it transforms into clarity. The moment you embrace grief, it softens into wisdom. The empath, who once played the healer to avoid rejection, now discovers they never needed to play a role at all. They are no longer an illusion of compassion. They are real. So ask yourself this: have you noticed the places in your life where your silence is no longer sustainable? Where the pressure in your chest, your throat, your body signals that something buried is begging to be freed? These eruptions are not signs you are broken. They are signs you are alive. They are proof that your shadow wants to join you, not as an enemy, but as a fierce ally. When you allow that fire to rise, you stop living half a life and begin living a whole one. Keep a journal of recurring dream symbols like floods, drowning, or endless corridors. These images are not random. They are your unconscious showing you where your life force has been trapped. Write them down, reflect on them, and let them guide you toward breaking the cycle. Have you ever wondered why walking away from someone who harmed you can feel more painful than staying with them? This is the paradox many empaths face. When they finally break free from the narcissist, what follows is not immediate peace, but a strange emptiness, almost like mourning a death. Yet, what they are grieving is not only the person, they are grieving the dream they once wrapped around that person. Think of the nights you stayed awake, replaying memories that never truly matched reality. Perhaps you told yourself, "They will change if I love them more," or "This is what devotion is supposed to look like." Deep down, your inner child still clung to the fantasy that love had to be earned, that safety came only after sacrifice. Jung called this the complex, a knot of childhood wounds, unmet needs, and unconscious beliefs that keep repeating themselves. The narcissist became the stage on which that old drama was replayed, and leaving them means dismantling not just a relationship, but the entire inner theater of false love. In reality, grief shows up in unexpected ways. It may come through physical collapse, fatigue, insomnia, even illness. The body, which carried the weight of years of self-betrayal, finally demands to be heard. You might feel waves of sadness so heavy that even simple tasks feel impossible. Or you may feel numb, disconnected, as though life has lost its colors. This is not weakness, it is release. Your body is teaching you that healing is not an idea, but a visceral process. Carl Jung believed that the soul never loses its truth, even if the ego builds masks around it. When you grieve the fantasy, you are actually creating space for your authentic self to return. But this raises a question worth reflecting on. What are you really mourning? The person or the parts of yourself you abandoned to keep their love? Healing begins when you stop trying to make sense of it all with logic, and instead allow your body and emotions to express what your mind cannot. Cry, tremble, rest. Let the grief move through you like a storm. Just as the earth renews after fire, so too does the psyche renew after loss. The death you feel is not the end of you. It is the end of the illusion that kept you imprisoned. Write a letter to your inner child. Acknowledge what they feared, what they gave up, and what they deserve now. Then burn or bury it as a symbolic ritual of release. This is not about forgetting, but about honoring the part of you that carried too much. When the ashes settle, you begin to see. What died was not love, but the illusion that love required your suffering. What if the love you kept chasing was never meant to be given by others? but remembered from within you. After the grief has emptied its storm, something strange and beautiful begins to emerge. Silence no longer feels hollow. Being alone no longer feels like punishment. The empath, once addicted to validation, begins to hear the whisper of a different rhythm, the quiet pulse of their own authority. It often starts small. A woman who used to anxiously check her phone for a reply begins leaving it in the other room while she drinks her coffee in peace. A man who used to over-explain himself at work simply says no without guilt. A mother who gave everything to her children starts painting again at night, not for approval, but because it brings her joy. These aren't dramatic transformations, but they are sacred, because each one signals the return of a self that was once buried beneath roles, guilt, and obligation. Carl Jung spoke of the union of the inner masculine and feminine, the anima and animus, as the foundation of individuation. When this inner marriage begins to happen, the empath no longer needs to be needed. They want to be known. They stop apologizing for taking up space. Their presence no longer begs to be loved. It radiates from a place of already being whole. But how do you know if this shift is happening within you? You may find yourself speaking more directly without shrinking. You may find that relationships built on neediness begin to fade, while fewer but deeper connections remain. You stop being the healer in every room, and instead become the mirror that reflects others to themselves, whether they like it or not. This is sovereignty, not the loud kind that needs to dominate, but the quiet kind that refuses to abandon itself. You are no longer chasing the old roles, fixer, savior, sacrifice. Now you walk as a presence. You let love be a conscious choice, not an unconscious craving. You stop pouring yourself into people who bring only confusion. You stop explaining your worth, because finally, your soul has reclaimed its own voice. Begin each morning with 5 minutes of intentional silence. No screens, no reacting. Just sit, breathe, and listen to what your inner self wants to say. This isn't just mindfulness, it's self-reconnection. When you listen long enough, you begin to hear the true leader within. And that voice, it never begs, it remembers. What if your personal healing is not only about you, but about everyone who came before you, and everyone who will come after? It's easy to believe that our wounds are private, our pain isolated. But what if your deepest ache is not just your own? What if your silence echoes the unshed tears of your grandmother who never spoke up, your mother who stayed in the wrong marriage, your father who swallowed his emotions like poison, never knowing another way? Many empaths carry not just their personal trauma, but the accumulated weight of generations who were never allowed to feel. In Jungian psychology, this is the ancestral shadow, patterns that live within the collective unconscious, passed down silently, invisibly, until someone is brave enough to feel it all. You are that rupture. You are that moment of sacred interruption. When you stop apologizing for your sensitivity, when you no longer betray your truth for peace, when you speak what was once forbidden to speak, you send shockwaves through your bloodline. Families do not just inherit eye color and bone structure. They inherit coping mechanisms, suppression styles, and emotional contracts that whisper, "Stay small, don't rock the boat, don't feel too much." You are breaking all of that. You are interrupting centuries of emotional erasure with a single honest breath. This work is mythic in scale. One empath choosing not to pass on the pain is not a small decision. It is the work of a soul warrior. It's not easy to face what entire lineages have denied. But when you hold your inner child and say, "You do not have to repeat this," you're not just comforting yourself. You're releasing the grief your ancestors were too afraid to grieve. You are ending the story they never had the freedom to rewrite. Many empaths underestimate the magnitude of their healing. They ask, "Is this enough? I'm just one person." But the truth is, in a world addicted to numbness, denial, and dominance, your willingness to feel is a radical act. Your presence is not passive. Your nervous system, once hijacked by chaos, now becomes a sanctuary of safety for those around you. Your love is no longer sacrifice, it is clarity. Your boundaries do not push people away, they invite those capable of mutual respect. So ask yourself, what generational story ends with you? What part of your pain was never truly yours? And what would your ancestors say if they could witness the courage it took for you to finally feel? Choose one family belief that has defined your emotional life. Write it down, then rewrite it. For example, love must be earned becomes, love is my birthright. Speak it aloud. Let your voice shake. You are not just healing, you are resurrecting what was buried. And in doing so, you become the ancestor your descendants will thank in their dreams. Have you ever felt the difference between walking into a room to be accepted and walking into it already whole? There comes a sacred turning point in the empath's journey when they no longer enter spaces trying to fix, please, or be seen. Instead, they walk in with a quiet power that doesn't demand attention. It commands it through presence. After years of emotional absorption, of losing themselves in the pain of others, something alchemizes. The empath, who once mistook suffering for connection, becomes the one who no longer bleeds for belonging. Carl Jung spoke of the self not as a perfected ideal, but as the totality of conscious and unconscious integration, the union of shadow and light. This is what the healed empath becomes, not a rescuer, not a reflection, but a radiator. Their energy no longer bends to avoid rejection. It stands, it emits. They do not need to be rescued, nor do they need to rescue. That identity has dissolved. And in its place is someone who lives in alignment with their own soul contract. You see it in their life now. They no longer over-explain their boundaries. They no longer feel guilty for saying no. They let people misunderstand them without chasing clarity. They no longer tolerate the draining phone calls, the unfinished emotional homework of others. Instead, they invest in their creative life. They wake up early to write. They take walks alone and feel full. They cry with the moon, but no longer drown in its tides. Their love becomes clean, intentional, not tangled in the need to be needed. This is not detachment, it is liberation. The spiritual warrior is not loud. They do not advertise their transformation. They simply stop participating in their own wounding. They know that saving others from themselves only delays both destinies. They know that when they shine, those meant to grow will be inspired, not controlled. They do not chase chaos or perform emotional labor for approval. They have left that temple behind. Now, they walk the sacred path of reverent self-expression. So, let us ask, what would your life look like if you stopped performing for love? What if your strength wasn't in how much you endured, but in how deeply you radiated peace? What would change if you believed that your mere presence is enough? Before any interaction, pause for one breath and ask, am I about to react from old survival or respond from my sovereignty? Notice how your body feels. Speak only from the energy of grounded truth. Let your posture reflect your healing. You are not here to save anyone. You are here to remember who you are and to let that remembrance ripple outward. What if the closure you were waiting for was never a conversation, but a realization? The empath's awakening is not dramatic. It is not an argument, nor a final plea to be understood. It is the moment they stop waiting to be seen by someone who was never looking. It is the quiet clarity that dawns not with rage, but with peace. In the end, they do not yell, they do not prove, they do not explain, they simply know, and that knowing becomes freedom. Carl Jung taught that individuation is the process of becoming who you truly are, separate from the projections and expectations of others. For the empath, this means no longer defining themselves by the wounds they tried to heal in others, no longer carrying the shame that never belonged to them, no longer chasing the illusion that love must be earned through sacrifice. The empath steps out of the psychic contract written by pain and steps into the sacred authorship of their own life. The narcissist may still throw tantrums in silence, demand attention, or try to resurrect control. But the empath no longer hears it, not because they are cold, but because they are clear. Their nervous system no longer dances for crumbs. Their soul no longer reaches for what was always withheld. They have become the one thing that can never be manipulated, integrated, a mirror too clean to distort, a presence too rooted to be pulled. And this is where the story transforms. What looked like abandonment was actually a return. What felt like loss was divine release. The empath who once poured their entire being into broken dynamics now pours it into their art, their voice, their body, their truth. They reclaim joy not as a reaction, but as their birthright. They do not seek belonging in others, they belong to themselves. So the question becomes, what if you stopped looking for someone to finish your healing and started honoring the one who has already survived so much? What if you stopped making your worth negotiable and finally stood in the wholeness that was never lost, only forgotten? You are not their echo. You are your own origin. You were never theirs to mold, fix, or control. You've always been your own, whole, luminous, and quietly unbreakable. Tonight, before sleep, place your hand on your heart and whisper, "I return to myself now." Say it 3 times. Say it until your nervous system believes it. Say it until no part of you is still waiting to be chosen. Let this be the moment you walk out of the performance and into your presence. If this touched something sacred inside you, don't let it fade into silence. Like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Your presence here is not just support, it's resonance. And if you feel moved to give back, your donation becomes a quiet but powerful gesture that helps keep this light alive for others still walking in the dark.